Hi, I'm Jacquie Franciulli for Gators Territory and return with On the Beat. And as always, we welcome Gainesville Sun's Graham Hall. And it's been an uneventful but eventful 2 weeks since we last spoke, Graham. Obviously, we've been dealing with Hurricane Dorian and tracking that storm, but also the aftermath of that Miami-Florida game. But before we get to that, I'm going to gloat for a second. During that On the Beat last week, I was the only one of the three of us that said it was going to be a close game. And I'm just going to bring up a quick shot of our final predictions on Friday because I did adjust my prediction at the end.
Is that allowed?
I did one on the beat for 24-17, but our Gators territory prediction, I did 24-20, Florida beating Miami. So I just want to gloat a little bit, Graham, because you did not think it was going to be a close game.
I didn't. I really thought that Florida had a chance to win by nearly 30 points. But this is where I think I do get a little bit of gloating. I think this leads us into a good topic for today. You said that Florida's offensive line would be a lot more problematic than I think they were on Saturday. You said that was a work in progress, and while that was a fair take, 23 starts coming into that game, I thought that they performed pretty admirably. At least I think you can say that a lot of their issues were overshadowed by some of Florida's other issues, an inability to establish the run game, which obviously you can put some of the blame on the offensive line, but obviously the early turnovers, the late defensive penalties, those things kind of were more problematic and ended up hurting Florida's chances more than I think the offensive line did. I thought Florida's offensive line would do well, and I thought that they did from a pass protection standpoint. Just one holding penalty, one false start. Feleipe Franks, that pocket was collapsing around him. He made some really nice throws off his back foot that I think if you go back and watch the film are more apparent there if you're watching from behind him than they were apparent on the broadcast. That offensive line I still think needs to do better from a run blocking standpoint, but I thought they performed really admirably from their pass blocking and their protection standpoint.
No, I did agree. There's a lot of questions around that O-line coming into the game, but I think they exceeded expectations. I know there's a lot of guys that had game experience on that line, minus Chris Bleich and John DeLance, but I think they all did very well. I think Chris Bleich was a guy that I see a lot of potential when you look back on film. He was a guy that you see that he was getting more comfortable as the game went on. I think the right side with John DeLance, I feel like he does need to improve. I think that's a side that Miami did take advantage of a couple of times, especially in the run, but you have to give DeLance credit. He was the guy that provided the key block for the Kadarius Toney 66-yard touchdown. So he hustled to get that block. So I think the O-line is not a position that I think today we're going to talk in a negative light. I think they did very well, and I think when we go through all the headlines this week, Graham, they were one of the big talking points among our media members. The other thing, Edgar Thompson from Orlando Sentinel, he was, talking about how Kadarius Toney was not used a lot. That was one thing that he learned from the game. He wished Kadarius Toney had more touches. You wrote about Ventura Miller's breakthrough performance, and now he did have one of the best performances on the defensive side. Obviously, we're going to touch on that in a second. And then I wrote about Feleipe Franks and how there was a lot of criticism this week about Feleipe Franks and how he said he's not looking for approval. And in the same vein, he's got the approval of his teammates and his coaches, with Trevon Grimes saying he likes the way he celebrates. So Feleipe Franks got most of the headlines this week. And actually, one of the editorials I wrote, my headline was Miami was better than you thought and Florida is better than you think. I think a lot of people were criticizing Feleipe Franks and his performance. And you mentioned it. Feleipe Franks did make some key throws in that game, and I think he took a lot of flack this week, and I honestly don't think the criticism was warranted to an extent. I think people had maybe too much expectation coming in for the game from Franks, but honestly, he is Feleipe Franks. He's the guy who goes out there, is not consistent the whole time, but he did improve. He has been improving, and I think that's something where I think people just had too much expectation from the guy and want them to change his personality, because he's not going to change who he is.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that, Jackie. I think that a lot of people were expecting this massive leap from Feleipe Franks, and honestly, I don't understand a lot where that came from. I think that when you look back on the end of last year, what Feleipe Franks really needed to improve on was a lot of little stuff. His decision-making, how he'll kind of roll out in the pocket when the play call doesn't really call for that, when the pressure doesn't really call for that, going through his progressions, his mental reads, zeroing in on his primary target. A lot of that stuff was stuff that we knew he could fix. He did a lot better job of a lot of that stuff against Miami. Like you were saying, I think that a lot of people expected Miami to be I think, terrible. I think that when we talked last week about Miami, most of the keys about why I was really confident in Florida's chances was Manny Diaz and Jaron Williams and that offensive line making a big start. And if you looked at the game, those are the things that decided it. Miami's defense was not a problem. So you look at how Feleipe Franks performed against that Miami defense that I think was number one in the country last year on third down. Returned most of their starters from last year. Quarterman was great. Gilbert Frierson. They clearly have a lot of talent with Al Blades. People forgot that their defensive coordinator didn't go anywhere. He just had more responsibilities put on him. So I think that if we look back in 6-7 weeks, we could see that this was not a bad game for Florida in many aspects, and a lot of people overreacted, especially to Feleipe Franks. The one thing that I really didn't understand, Jackie, was a lot of people saying that just because you didn't see signs of immediate improvement that he regressed. I don't understand how people make that correlation or equate those two things. For Feleipe Franks, he's going to have some mistakes. He's going to have some rough things. You take out the fumbles, you take out those interceptions, and Feleipe Franks had a really good game. He averaged 56% completion percentage last year. He threw 64% against Miami with those 2 interceptions and the 2 fumbles. I think that obviously he can improve from there, and if we look back to last year, that's something that everyone at Florida did across the board, was improve from a game-to-game basis. They always say you can't replicate game experience, and I think you saw that from Florida. Last note, I think that if you're Florida, you had everyone kind of pile on you in week 0 because all your mistakes were magnified. You were on the big stage. You look back at what happened in the SEC East last week. Losses to Missouri, Tennessee. Auburn looked impressive at the end, I'll say. I think that if you look at it, it's really become all of a sudden a 2-team race in the SEC East already. Jake Bentley lost at South Carolina. They're going to have to start a freshman quarterback under Will Muschamp. Georgia and Florida, they're only really 2 teams who can come out of week 1 thinking that their odds have improved, I think, in claiming the SEC East crown. And I think that is the overall focus for Florida. It shouldn't be whether Feleipe Franks threw 1 interception. You shouldn't be woe is me over that. You should realize that you're still in a primary position to compete for the college football playoff. You may have some flaws, but what team doesn't right now?
Yeah, I think people forget Florida did win against Miami. It was not a loss. It was a win, and it was a good win for Florida, and I think it will be a better win down the line because I think Miami is going to move up the rankings if what we saw, they continue to progress. I think when you look at the ACC Coastal, apart from Virginia, I think Miami will do good in that conference, which at the end will help Florida. So I think this is a lot of overreaction in the beginning, and I think a lot of people just are or are not in Feleipe Franks' camp. I think if you like him, you like him. If you hate him, you hate him, and no one's going to change their mind. But think of it this way. Dan Mullen chose Feleipe Franks to be a starter for a reason. He is the quarterback that gives him the best chance to win right now, not Emory Jones, not Kyle Trask. So I think that's something where people need to realize maybe Feleipe Franks is a starter because that's the best guy right now. Maybe in a year's time that'll be changed, but right now Feleipe Franks is the best guy, and he was the guy who led that game-winning touchdown drive against Miami. Now let's move on from Feleipe Franks. I think we talked about him by nauseum right now after these 2 weeks. I think one guy that I really want to talk about, or basically a couple guys actually, because on defense we had Ventura Miller. We said he had a breakout performance. I think many people were so focused on Amari Burney and how he's a versatile athlete moving from linebacker to star, but Ventura Miller said, hey, hello, I'm here. I'm a really good linebacker. Remember me? And I think he did show that. He had a great game on Saturday 2 weeks ago. And then along with Jonathan Greenard, Jeremiah Moon, Jabari Zuniga, that's a scary defense for Florida.
Absolutely. A lot of people talked about, like you said, Amari Burney's transition from guy coming out of playing safety in Tampa to playing that star position, but also moving to the money linebacker position. Florida was really looking for a between the gaps tackler, who can kind of fill in there and get some pressure on the quarterback. Ventura Miller was certainly one of those guys in line, but I don't think anyone expected the type of performance that he had against the Miami Hurricanes. 2 sacks. I think he had a tackle and a half for loss, a pass breakup. The guy was in it on every series, and this was his first amount of significant action. He had played 4 games. You talked about the redshirt rule benefiting some of those guys like Chris Blake. That really benefits linebackers because you can't replicate that game experience, like I said. You have to be able to sense it out there, and he did that extremely well. I think that you're going to have a very reliable linebacker moving forward, and it goes to show that Florida has some depth, I think, at the position that people didn't realize they had. You factor in John Greenard. You factor in Jeremiah Moon, who was actually playing some star against the Canes. You factor in James Houston, who, again, another tough play. That's what people are going to remember him for, but he had a lot of really, really sound tackling and good plays for a unit that was struggling to wrap up all night long. I think that Florida came away feeling a lot better about their linebackers. I also want to draw back 2 things for you. Remind people that people used to nitpick and tear apart Chris Leak for all of his mistakes. Well, he helped Florida lead Florida to a national championship, and he sits as Florida's all-time passing leader right now. So it goes to show that you can be a nearly perfect quarterback, set a bunch of program records, and people are still going to find some things to gripe about. And as for the touches on wide receivers, I think we kind of stepped over that. That's going to be a main issue all year long, and I caution people out there not to read too much into it. As long as those wide receivers themselves don't get unhappy, Florida's not going to have too many problems. I mean, I'm going to struggle to count them all off on the top of my head. You know, people always talk about the wide receivers that they want to see big game action. You mentioned Kadarius Toney, Van Jefferson, Trevon Grimes. And I think that you lead with those three names, but you leave out two of the most reliable guys, and Josh Hammond and Freddie Swain, two guys that had probably the biggest impact plays against the Miami Hurricanes. The reason I brought this all up is that it's going to be hard for all those guys to stay happy and get considerable touches all year long. Van Jefferson, Trey Grimes, Kadarius Toney, one reception games against Miami. Not to play spoiler for people out there, but that's going to happen more than one time this season. They just have too many guys to catch the ball. I mean, Kyle Pitts, the tight ends are going to have to get involved. I mean, it's going to be often like it was against the Canes where 4 receptions is going to lead the team, if not fewer than that, because they just have too much skill position talent. And honestly, you much rather would have that than have one guy that defenses can kind of figure in on, double cover in some games, and really get you into some trouble. I was thinking all the time that if Florida didn't have all that skill position talent and they couldn't establish the run, that game could have gone wildly different against Miami.
Yeah, I was kind of shocked at sometimes, though, when with Dan Mullen's play calling because of I thought he was going to go with those one-on-one matchups early on because of the size differential between Florida's wide receivers and Miami's DBs. Florida's wide receivers are 6'3", 6'4", 6'5", while Miami's DBs, the tallest was 6'3", was the tallest guy. So I was really shocked about that, especially when you have two 6'6" tight ends. So that was something where I was questioning a little bit Dan Mullen about his choice of play calls during the game. But we'll get back to the wide receivers and tight ends when we talk about what we want to see on Saturday. I want to get back to the defense right quick. You talked about Jeremiah Moon playing star, Amari Burney playing star, Trey Dean playing star. Those are the three guys that kind of rotated in that game. So with Ventura Miller stepping up, James Houston stepping up, you look at the safety play. You looked at those missed tackles that happen in the game. Obviously, those are going to need to get cleaned up. But when you see the safety play, what do you do? Do you keep Amari Burney at linebacker, or do you move Amari Burney to star and put Trey Dean at safety?
That's a good question. I think that you have to keep doing what you're doing and move Amari Burney between that linebacker role and that star role, and you really need to bank on getting some of your safeties back here. I think that Sean Davis had probably the best performance of any of the safeties against Miami. I mean, just was the most sound tackler, was consistently getting in there, didn't shy away from action, and that is going to be an issue for Florida all year long. They do have a lack of depth at safety, and some of those guys are banged up. Jalen Taylor's health is going to be a question mark all year long. As right now, we also don't know the status for Brad Stewart moving forward. So until you get two guys that have a lot of starting experience, probably the most starting experience in Florida's safety group, until you get those guys back, it really is going to be kind of a by-committee approach, which means that the cornerbacks and Trey Dean and Amari Burney are going to have to be filling some of those roles. So I would expect for a lot of shuffling, at least for the first 4 weeks until Florida gets back at full strength, because otherwise they're going to be in some dire straits. I don't think they're going to have a substituting or conditioning problem like Florida State had, but it's going to be clear that if they keep rotating at the rate they're at and if they can't get healthy, and if Jalen Taylor can't give them more than 30% of snaps, then Florida is going to have some issues, and they're going to have to figure out dropping Amari Burney back there or dropping Trey Dean back there. Two guys, luckily, that Florida recruited to play different positions but played a lot of safety at the high school level, Jackie.
Yeah, Nick Savage does a good job keeping these guys hydrated. Don't worry, guys. They have to drink water as soon as they arrive at practice, and it's a continual effort. It doesn't start on Monday or Tuesday. It's a continuous effort to hydrate at Florida. We did talk about the safety position and how, Sean Davis did break out into the game. When you move forward, do you see maybe him taking up more of the starting position? One thing I did notice in the game, and I did mention it on the Stadium and Gale podcast last week, was that Jalen Taylor sometimes looked like he was hesitant dropping his shoulder. Now, he had 2 shoulder injuries. After you have surgeries on your shoulder, you might play with a little bit of a hesitancy. Did you see that? Is that something when you look at him, I know he's a vocal leader in that group, which is the reason why he sometimes starts and why Grantham and Mullen really have confidence in him. But when you see that missed tackle that led to that Miami touchdown where it could have been brought down right before that goal line, do you say, you know what, maybe we should put Sean Davis in?
It's certainly a question Florida's going to have to answer moving forward, because I think that and not to discredit his game, I think that you could have said last year that Jalen Taylor's most sound aspect of his game was his tackling. He was a hard hitter. He wrapped up well. I mean, that's what got him to Florida. He's good in coverage, much better, I think, in zone coverage than in man coverage, good in pursuit. But those things weren't evident against Miami, and I think a lot of it is what you said, that shoulder injury. Florida talked a lot about this throughout spring camp and fall camp. Guys weren't hitting at full strength. They had a lot of guys just missing and out of action, and Jalen Taylor was one of those guys. He was in the red no-contact jersey for 3 of 4 weeks in fall camp. Like you said, he's had multiple procedures on his shoulder. It's not the first safety to come through the doors at Florida that's had bad shoulder injuries. I'm not going to compare his health to Nick Washington's, but that's one of the first that comes to mind, a guy that lost, I think, most of his positive traits because of, the humanity aspect of football. They're going to find ways to still get him involved because, like you said, he's an emotional leader. When Florida is trying to, get guys motivated on defense, he's always right in the mix of it. And when Florida's also, recruiting guys from the Alabama, Georgia area, some other players, Jalen Taylor's often right in the mix. So clearly a valuable guy for the team as a whole. But when it comes to actually getting him out there, I think that Florida is going to look more and more towards Sean Davis, because you look at a guy who's a sound tackler right now, I think is a little bit better in pursuit and coverage, and Florida can't just have that high risk out there in Jalen Taylor, regardless of what he gives the team. I wouldn't be surprised to see him move more towards a coaching sideline role to get some of these younger safeties prepared that Florida just brought into the mix. But I also would not be surprised, knowing what we've seen out of Jalen Taylor, to see him get healthy, get motivated, and become a factor for this defense moving forward, Jackie.
Yeah, he was wearing a red non-contact jersey throughout, I think, halfway through fall camp, 3 weeks. So he probably is still feeling a little bit of that shoulder injury. So maybe as the season progresses, he'll get healthier and he'll be a little bit more confident when he tackles. Now, quickly, Graham, we have a game. UT Martin this Saturday. Obviously, it's not one of the big headlining games, but it's a really good game for Florida to kind of clean up all the stuff we talked about. But what I want to see is some of these young players. Obviously, I want to see Florida pass it out a little bit more, see guys like Van Jefferson, Trayvon Grimes, but I would like to see Jacob Copeland. I would like to see Damian Pierce a little bit more. I would like to see some of those freshmen play, maybe some Kyer Elam, some Chester Kimbrough. We've been hearing he's been one of the surprises in the secondary since his arrival. I want to see some of those guys, and of course I want to see Emory Jones. I think that's something, we talk about people saying, put Emory Jones in, Feleipe Franks having a bad game. I want to see how much progress he does in a live game, because it's so much you can see in practice, especially what we've been able to see in practice during fall camp.
Yeah, we really haven't seen Emory Jones, I think, since last spring, maybe this previous spring. The guy clearly has improved from what we've seen in practice with his throwing motion, his footwork, his physicality. Obviously, he's up about 15 pounds, lost a lot of body fat. He's quicker. I think those aspects could give Dan Mullen's offense another dimension. It just is a matter of, I think, when. I think that if Feleipe Franks, and I was saying this to someone earlier, Florida's quarterback depth chart is not as clear-cut as I think people think. If Feleipe Franks goes down with an injury, I think that Kyle Trask is still the guy that Dan Mullen trusts right now to run the offense. But if Emory Jones has an opportunity to come in with Florida up by 2-3 scores, Dan Mullen's going to use that opportunity to give him some valuable game experience. There's no red shirt on the horizon for him. They have to use this year as much as possible. Feleipe Franks knows that he has a pro career possibly in his future. He wants to be building that and out of this program in a year and possibly in the NFL draft. Emory Jones is the next guy up and who they're going to count on to run the offense next year. The time is now, or at least soon, to start getting him developed. I would not be surprised if he played that entire second half. If I'm Dan Mullen, that's the way you want it to go. You want Florida to be up by 25, 30 points heading into the second half so that you can get some valuable game experience for, like you said, Emory Jones, those valuable freshman DBs, because, people think of freshmen, they think of DBs, but think of the amount of freshman DBs that have come through Florida, and it's kind of an expectation when you get recruited at a high level that you're going to play some. I mean, Janoris Jenkins, Vernon Hargraves, just recent ones to come through, Chester Kimbrough, Jaden Hill, Kyer Elam, all those guys especially wanting to get some valuable minutes as a freshman. So if they're not contributing at a high rate as a freshman, they can be guys seen as the next men up next year when CJ Henderson and Marco Wilson have some tough decisions to make, Jackie.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see those young guys in action on Saturday, so hopefully we'll be able to see especially Emory Jones and see his progress. Well, thank you so much, Graham, and obviously thank you so much for watching, and obviously go to GatorsTerritory.com as we continue to count down to the big game on Saturday.